The gospel today, Bartimaeus the Blind Man, gives us a little insight into our lives as Christians in general, but I want to speak particularly about the insight he gives to those who are discerning a call to the priesthood, or the religious, or the consecrated life, because I think he gives us a great sort of example of what that looks like. So Bartimaeus, it says, is a blind man, right? Because he's blind, he can't see. And because he can't see, we can imagine that some of his other senses maybe are a little more sensitive, right? He's able to perhaps hear a little better because he's unable to see. And so because of this, he hears Jesus passing by, right? Everyone else can see, but Bartimaeus hears it. And it shows our need for ultimately a prayer life, right? To sort of dull some of our senses, or the intake using the senses, so that we can be more attuned to our spiritual sense, to be able to hear God passing by, to be able to hear God whenever he calls us. And so we, all Christians again, but particularly those who are discerning this call to the priesthood or the religious life, need to spend time in silent prayer so that they can hear what it is that God is calling them to do. I remember doing this whenever I was thinking about the priesthood. I started working for that long 6 months that I worked in the workforce, and I made the decision that I would go and do a holy hour on Monday nights after work, before I went home, because I know me, and I knew if I went home I wouldn't get back out. And so that hour each week spent silently with the Lord in adoration in the chapel helped me to be able to sort of put all the pieces together, to hear the call, and to be able to finally make that decision to go to the seminary. Bartimaeus also gives us three sort of things that we should do in responding to a call from Jesus. He gives us three things that are noted in the gospel today. And the first one is that he threw aside his cloak. Now, we can sort of think about the cloak in terms of what it meant in his day, that it was this sense of protection, right? Something that kept him warm. And we also hear in other places in the scriptures that Jesus instructs people, right, if you take someone's cloak as sort of wait for a payment, that you have to give it back to him before night, because that's the only thing he has to sleep in. Right? So a cloak was something that protected people. It was something that helped them to really stay alive in a lot of ways. But the cloak can also be looked at as things that are weighing us down, things that are holding us back. And so whenever we hear this call from Jesus, we have to throw that cloak aside and be ready to follow him. Now, this cloak in religious, priestly vocations could be the judgment of our family and friends. I was very fortunate that my family and friends, pretty much from the moment I said that I was thinking about this, were very supportive. My dad questioned me a little bit, like a good dad, because I talked so long about something else that we'll get to later. He said, well, what about that? And after I explained it, he said, okay. He may not have understood it fully, but he was willing to support me. And so I was very fortunate, but a lot of people are not as fortunate. A lot of people struggle with their families, giving them a hard time for wanting to pursue this. Maybe because they aren't practicing the faith and they just don't understand in general. Maybe it's because they want grandchildren from their kids. There's a lot of reasons why families could not be supportive. But that is that cloak, right, that needs to be thrown aside. That even in the face of discouragement from those who are closest to us, if the Lord is calling, we have to throw that aside and follow him. Other things that could be symbolized by that cloak are other opportunities that we have. Right? Thankfully, the priests that we have are very talented in a lot of ways. Right? Maybe not me, but others are. You can talk to them and know that they had so many opportunities to be able to do so much. But they put that aside, right? They threw off that cloak to follow the Lord whenever he called. I experienced this somewhat too, because I studied here before I went to seminary. And I had some very good professors while I was here, and so I wanted to go on and teach, which meant I had to go to further schooling, which I'm sort of happy I didn't do now. But at the time, that's what I wanted to do. And so I spent the last year and a half or so of my time here applying to graduate schools. I got accepted to 3 out of the 4 that I applied to. The one that rejected me, I never think about them. But I got accepted, and I applied for assistance because I knew I needed to if I was going to go to graduate school. And eventually I decided that I had to go to seminary. And so I had to turn those things down. Right? Not only being accepted, but they wanted to actually pay me to go to school. And I said, no, I have to throw that cloak off, right? This is another opportunity. That's good. But I think the Lord is calling me, and so I have to throw that cloak aside to be able to pursue what it is that He is calling me to do. So there are many things, right, that come up that can get in the way. But if the Lord is calling, we have to throw those aside. The second thing that Bartimaeus does as Jesus calls him is he springs up. It doesn't say that he sort of groaned and said, all right, I'm going to go over there. Or, you know what, tell Jesus to come see me. I'm a blind man. Right? He can see. He should walk to me. He sprang up after he threw off his cloak. He sprang up. And the same has to be true for those, again, who are called to the religious life, to the priesthood, to the consecrated life. That if I think about my story, there was a moment when I sprang. Right? It took a long time to sort of put the pressure on that spring. Right? I had to pray about it a lot, and I talked to a lot of friends and family and priests and other people who had gone to seminary. But once I finally had that decision made, I did. Right? I sprang up. And I remember very clearly, I decided I was going to go. I met with the vocation director, and I told my sister. It was the first person in my family that I told that I was going to the seminary because she and I had gotten very close the past years. And I said, well, I'll tell her, and I'll be able to sort of judge my family's reaction based on how she reacts. And so she came home on the Thursday, Holy Thursday. She was a school teacher, so she was out for the Easter break. And we had a good conversation, talked for a while, told her all the stuff. And then I went and checked my email, and that's when I had my financial offer from the university that I wanted to go to for graduate school. And it gave me maybe like a quarter of a second of hesitation, but not much, because I had made that decision. Right? I knew that that was a possibility, that that was a good thing. I had thrown that cloak off, and now it was time to spring up and to follow what it is that God was calling me to do. And so after that good discernment, right, we have to spring up and go. I remember speaking to another friend of mine who was already in the seminary, and he told me, he said, yeah, if you go, you got to give it 2 years. And he was very matter-of-fact about it. And I look up to him, so I said, all right, I got to do this. And so I set my sights on doing those 2 years. Right? No matter what came up in those 2 years, I knew I had to do that. And then after those 2 years, I wanted to leave. That convinced me again to stay. But right, I'd sprung up and I was going to do what it was that God was calling me to do. And the third thing that Bartimaeus does, he throws off his cloak, he springs up, and he comes to Jesus. Right? He comes to Jesus. Now, what is it that made Bartimaeus do all of this? Why did he go to Jesus? Right? He wanted something. In particular, he wanted to see, right? This is what he tells Jesus. But he wanted to see for some other reason. Right? He wanted to see for the same reason that we want anything that we want. Ultimately, he wanted to be happy. Being blind was a burden for him. And he believed that if he could see, that his life would be better, that he would be happy. And so he goes to Jesus, he approaches him, and he asks for that gift, right, to be able to see. A big hurdle for people who are called to something extreme like the priesthood, like the religious life, like consecrated life, are worried about a lot of things. I think in some way they all sort of boil down to that. can God make me happy? Can God make me happy? Can I be happy if I don't get married? Can I be happy if I don't have children of my own? Can I be happy doing the work of the Lord for the rest of my life? And this is a question that I continue, unfortunately, to ask. And this was brought up to my attention on a recent trip. So I mentioned recently I went to Rome for the ordination of one of our seminarians who was ordained a deacon and will become a priest this coming summer. And I was supposed to go with some friends. And they ended up not being able to come for whatever reason. And I had this slight thought in my mind. Well, why am I even going now? Right? It's not going to be fun. What am I going to do? And over my time there, I got to pray in the chapel where I spent so much time praying when I was in the seminary. And I realized that that was my doubt. I doubted that God alone could make me happy. And I thought I needed these external helps to be happy. And God provided so much in that time that I was on that trip. I was able to visit with friends that I knew in town. I was able to go to places that I had prayed in before, visit old professors. And so it's like God was giving me a resounding answer to that question, can I be enough? Can I make you happy? And the answer was yes. The answer was nothing else can make you that happy. Right? Come to me if you want to be happy. And we hear this in the readings today. Right? In the first reading, we hear from the prophet Jeremiah, and he's telling the people to shout for joy because they have been ransomed. Right? To shout for joy because the Lord of Israel is their Lord, is their God. In the responsorial psalm, we sang, the Lord has done great things for us. We are filled with joy. Not like the Lord has done some okay things and, our life is decent. I'm managing. No, the Lord has done great things for us and we are filled with joy. We're overflowing with joy because of the good things that the Lord has done for us. And then in the gospel, it doesn't say it explicitly, but we could imagine the joy of Bartimaeus. Imagine walking around blind your entire life. And in an instant, you're healed and you're able to see. I'm sure he was filled with joy. And that only happened because he threw off the cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. And Jesus was able to heal him and allow him to experience that joy. Now, the last point I want to make is Bartimaeus, his reaction after he's healed. Right, so Jesus tells him, go your sight, he restores his sight and says, go your way. Go your way. He doesn't say, come follow me, like he says to the apostles, like he says to others, but he says, go your way. And what does it say that Bartimaeus does? Immediately, he received his sight and he followed Jesus on the way. So Bartimaeus' way is the way of Jesus. And again, this is something that I experienced. When I was first starting to hear this call, I was not very excited. I was actually kind of mad. And when it got really strong towards the end of college, I was like, God, you couldn't have made this clearer earlier. Like, that was hard. I could have escaped all that. And I was thinking that there was two paths, right? That I could do what I wanted and be happy, or I could do what God wanted, which I kind of knew was what you were supposed to do, but I didn't think that that would make me happy. But Bartimaeus shows us that our way and God's way is the same. What we truly desire and what God wants for us are the same. Might take some prayer and some struggling through it and some talking with people to figure it out, but that's the same thing. And so it's only in following Christ. It's only in doing what he calls us to do that we are really going to be as happy as we could possibly be. And so really there is nothing to fear if God is calling us to this life, because he is going to fill us with so much more joy than we could imagine. I tell people this all the time, that if you could talk to college me and say, all right, imagine your life. Imagine all the things that you think would make life wonderful. And I had the wife I wanted, and the kids I wanted, and the job I wanted, and all of the things. I could not imagine being as happy as I am as a priest. I couldn't imagine. Just even with all of the struggles and all of the hardships and all of the times where I'm sitting there going, Lord, what in the world are you asking me to do? I'm still joyful in that because this is what God has created me to do. This is what he created me for. And so we pray for, again, all Christians, but particularly those who are discerning at life of the priesthood or the religious life or the consecrated life, that they would have the strength to be able to follow Bartimaeus, right? To throw off their cloak, to spring up, and to follow Jesus, realizing that that is what is going to make us happy.